Well, hello to our alumni of the University of Toronto's Faculty of Applied Arts and Applied Science and Engineering, and everyone tuning in from around the world. In fact, we'd love it if you could type in what part of the globe you're tuning in from today in the chat feature to share with our audience. Welcome to everyone. My name is Mark Rittinger, and I'm the Executive Director of Advancement for the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering. Thank you for joining us here today for our November School Lunch and Learn presentation, featuring students from the Department of Engineering Science speaking on their international experiences. Before starting, I wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I also wish to acknowledge that here in Canada and for many countries around the world, today marks our annual day of remembrance for those who fell in the First and Second World Wars and other action. Today we honor the sacrifices of fellow Canadians and those remembered everywhere, including the alumni, students, faculty, and staff of the University of Toronto community. Now, just a quick housekeeping item before we get started. Please send your questions to our speakers today in the group chat section. I can see it's already buzzing. That's great. My colleagues are pulling together all of your questions so that they don't get lost, and this will help our speakers get through as many questions as possible during the Q&A period, which will be conducted after all the presentations have concluded. We'd also ask that you please refrain from any side conversations in the group chat function so that we don't distract away from our speakers today. Now, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to pass the reins over to the chair of the Lunch and Learn program, Lori Hevola. Lori is an Electrical 65 graduate and one of our most dedicated and engaged members of the alumni community. Lori has been chairing school lunch and learn events for several years and continues to generously give his time to help continue the tradition here in our virtual event space. And with that, I'll pass it over to Lori to welcome our speakers for today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Today we are excited to have three students join us from the Division of Engineering Science to talk about how their engineering education is transforming into a global experience for students today. As students graduate into a continually connected world, as we now know, the demand for a global mindset has become a priority. This is something that Dean Christopher Yip has marked as a major priority for the faculty, to give as many students as possible an international experience during their time here in engineering. Two such programs helping to create those opportunities are the Engineering Science Research Opportunities Program, or ESROP, and the Professional Experience Year, or PEY, Co-op program. Our students today will be presenting their experiences literally from all over the world. And though most cannot travel at this time, these programs continue to help connect our alumni community from all over the world with our students. Each of our three students today will present for approximately 10 to 15 minutes on their own experience. We ask that you hold your questions until the very end of all presentations, when our speakers will be available to answer your questions together. So now our first speaker is Brian Lamb, who will be speaking about the ESROP program. Brian is an engineering science student in the anticipated class of 2T1 plus PEY. Today he will be speaking with us on his research experience in the ESROP program, which placed him at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Brian, thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
Hello, and thank you so much for that introduction. So let me just share my screen now, and then we can get started with my presentation. All right, cool. Okay, so just hello everyone. I'm going to be talking about my summer research in Hong Kong. So just a brief introduction about ESROP for those of you who might not know. This is a summer research program for EngSci's students. And so we spend about 12 to 16 weeks abroad at a partner institution. So these include places in Europe, Australia, Asia. And EngSci actually gives us a stipend to help with the financial costs, and this really helps with the financial burden of having to complete research overseas for a long period of time. So Hong Kong, personally for me, is a very special place. I was actually born in Hong Kong, but I moved to Canada in grade 3. So over the years, sometimes I would go back for about a week or two, but this is the first time in a very long time since I immigrated that I've been spending a longer period in Hong Kong. So it almost felt like I was a tourist in the place that I was born. So Hong Kong is also known as Asia's world city, and is very famous for its large amount of skyscrapers. So you can kind of see that in our picture at Victoria Peak here. But contrary to what most people think, there's actually a lot of rural land in Hong Kong as well. So we did a lot of hiking. Here we went to Lion Rock. We did hiking on Dragon's Back as well, one of the more popular trails. Unfortunately, we went on a bad day, so we couldn't see as much as they would have said that we should have seen. And in the bottom here, this is a picture of the Victoria Harbour in Central. So one of the more popular touristy places. And then, so I did my research at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And this is actually the largest campus in Hong Kong, and it's one of the top universities in Hong Kong. It's located in Sha Tin, so it's a little further away from typical tourist areas or the central business places. And also, unlike what its name suggests, the teaching language at CUHK is actually English. And CUHK is kind of like U of T, where it has a college system, and there are 9 colleges in total. And as I said, the Chinese University of Hong Kong is huge. Here's a picture of its campus, and it basically takes up the entire hill that you can see in the picture. So it's serviced by its own metro station that you can see at the bottom of the picture there. And because it's so large, it has its own campus shuttle bus service. This is absolutely necessary, in my opinion, because walking from that metro station actually to the hostel where we stayed is a 30-minute walk, and it's completely uphill. And given how hot Hong Kong is, you'll be drenched. So I was really thankful for that bus service. It's a very beautiful campus. To the top left there, you see a picture of the Pavilion of Harmony. So on a good day, you can see a reflection pool there, as well as a picture across the Tolu Harbor, where CUHK is situated. And so the bottom right there, that's a picture from across Tolu Harbor at Wu Kai Sha Beach at sunset. But I think it was a really pretty place. And you can actually kind of see the CUHK campus just at the very left here. So we stayed at a hostel at Lee Wu Sing College in Hong Kong. And personally, I think it was very fascinating that they had to build this on this building on the side of the hill. It's like they ran out of flat land. And I guess the good news about building something like this is that you can get a very good view out of one side of the hostel. The bad news is I got unlucky, so I got a room that was facing the other side. So I just got a view of the road. And at CUHK, we are actually part of their own summer research program, the Summer Undergraduate Research Program. And this is a program for students abroad. And there are about 60 students participating. So there are a lot of students from Canada and also the UK. And this is one of the 2 programs that CUHK hosts for international students. There's also a summer school program. And combined, there are actually a lot of U of T students at CUHK. I think I met in total somewhere between 10 to 20 students. So it's not just us, EngSci's students that were there. I'm going to talk about my project. This is the name, an FPGA-based CNN inference accelerator for diagnosing multiple rare types of colorectal cancers during endoscopy. So this is a big mouthful, and I'm going to talk about this a little more in detail pretty soon. But just a disclaimer, there will be images of the endoscopy process, and I do recognize that it's kind of lunchtime right now, so just a warning on that. And so first, let me introduce our professor who was supervising us. So her name is Professor Carmen Poon. She's the assistant professor in the Department of Surgery, which is under the Faculty of Medicine at CUHK. And she's actually an EngSci graduate in the biomedical engineering option. So she completed her master's at U of T and then her PhD at CUHK. And her research interests are in wearable sensing and endoscopic informatics, and with the potential of improving surgical practice. So that links very well to our project. Just to give an introduction about our project, so this is about colorectal cancer, which is one of the most common cancers worldwide. And colorectal cancer typically develops from what we call a polyp, which is an abnormal growth in the colon. But colorectal cancer is preventable, and it can be prevented through colonoscopy. And how this works is a doctor would visually examine your colon using an endoscope, and it would visually identify and try to classify these polyps. And so the ones that are at risk of developing into cancer, they would resect during your colonoscopy. But the problem is that there's around 25% of these polyps that are typically missed during the colonoscopy procedure. And this can be due to various factors. So like natural folds in the colon, just the difficulty of trying to visually inspect your colon due to your colon conditions. So our project is using deep learning to try to help doctors identify and classify polyps during endoscopy. And this is done in real time. So the way this works is we use a object detection and classification framework called YOLO v2 version 2. And we train essentially a large neural network with a database of many images that are taken during endoscopy. And this framework processes these images kind of in 3 steps. So the first step is you would divide this image into multiple regions. And for each of these regions, so it's kind of shaped like a grid, it would predict a bounding box for a potential object and also class probability. So how likely what's in that box would be classified as a particular object. And finally, we use something called non-max suppression. And what this does is it would get rid of all the redundant boxes that you kind of see in the second image and leave only the best suited bounding boxes for your objects. So I'll talk a little bit more about non-max suppression and how this works. So essentially, if you're given 2 bounding boxes, you look at what's called the IOU, the intersection over union. So this is the area where the 2 bounding boxes intersect over the combined union area. And so this basically gives you a measure of how much 2 bounding boxes overlap. So if this IOU is very high, and you would say that these 2 bounding boxes overlap a lot, and you would only keep the one that has the higher probabilities. And so on the right, you see an example where there might have been multiple bounding boxes generated for that particular polyp. But after using NMS, you're able to filter out the redundant boxes. And the other thing, this part that we're working on is on data augmentation. And this is because data for training the model that I was talking about can be very hard to obtain because we have to get it from actual endoscopy procedures. And also needed a lot more data because sometimes the model was misclassifying medical instruments as polyps. And so data augmentation is a way for us to create more training data and also increase the variety of data that we use for training. And the way that works is you would take an original image, so kind of like this one on the left, and you would apply transformations. For example, rotating, reflecting, adding blurs, or brightening and making the image a little darker. And with this, you can increase the variety of data and hopefully improve the model's performance. And so finally, after our research period, we presented our work at a poster presentation. I found this a very cool event because we would get to see what the other students were working on as well at CUHK. So it was a good time to kind of interact with others and also learn about what they've been doing. So with that, I'm going to talk about some other fun aspects of Hong Kong while I was there. Definitely, Hong Kong is very well known for its food. For good food and also relatively cheap food. So you see a lot of pictures here on the bottom. There's dim sum, Peking duck. There's even bubble tea French toast, which may sound weird, but tastes better than it looks. So it's just a lot of variety of food as well, because as Hong Kong brands itself, Asia's world city. Another slide for food, because there's just so much good food there. So yeah, on top of just cheap and good food, Hong Kong has a lot of restaurants on the Michelin guide. And it's known for some of the cheapest Michelin star food around the world. So definitely had to try that out. This was Michelin starred restaurant for roasted BBQ duck that we tried out. You see an image there on traditional Hong Kong desserts, ramen, Japanese food, Japanese desserts. So food overall was amazing. And as a person who really likes food, it was really great that I could try something new like almost every day. And so some more places that we visited during my time in Hong Kong. There happened to be a Studio Ghibli exhibition. So for those of you who may not know, Studio Ghibli is a Japanese animated film studio, and it produces some very famous films like Totoro. And we also went to neighboring Macau, which is kind of like Asia's Las Vegas with its casinos. We also took a few pictures there. Unfortunately, I was too young to actually enter the actual casino parts, but it was fine because I wasn't going to gamble anyways. Yeah, so this is kind of the end of my presentation. And I just want to say, for me personally, ESROP was not just an experience for me to kind of travel around, but it was very, on a practical sense, I got to develop a lot of technical skills. This was kind of like my first like engineering related job, and I think it was, on a practical sense, it was very helpful in me also securing PY term this year. And also, it was just a very good time getting to know other people from around the world, and also being to explore a place that I was born in but kind of became unfamiliar with as I spent more time of my life in Canada now. But yeah, with that, just want to say thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Brian, especially for staying within the 15-minute time limit for each speaker. Our next speaker today is Gwyneth Carroll. Gwyneth is also an engineering science student in the year 2T0 plus PEY and is currently in her final year of undergraduate study. Gwyneth is joining us today to speak about her experience in the PEY co-op program, which last year sent her to work at the Koch Center for Integrative Cancer Research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which of course is in Cambridge. Gwyneth, thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Laurie. So I will also just get my slides up quickly. All right, so hello everyone. I'm glad you guys could all join us. My name is Gwyneth, and as mentioned, I'm a 2TO plus PUI in the biomedical engineering option. And today I'm going to talk a bit about my experience with the PUI co-op program. So I'm sure you're all familiar, but the PUI is professional experience here where you work for 12 to 16 months, whether it's in research or in industry. So there's lots of different reasons why students decide to do PUI. A lot of my friends chose to do it to gain experience or to gain connections. The reason I did PUI was to help me figure out what I wanted to pursue after graduation. And for this overall, it has been an invaluable experience. And because of my goals, I was quite particular when applying to jobs. And one of the things that attracted me to the Langer Lab job was the job description in terms of what my responsibilities would be and in terms of the research they do and how applicable it is. And additionally, for me, it was also a new place to visit. And growing up overseas, the international aspect was a big draw. So I packed up and I drove the 9 hours or so it took to get to Boston with my grandparents and my mom. We had a nice weekend walking through old Boston, and then I started work. But it wasn't quite that simple. So with PUI, you have all the paperwork you have to do. When you go overseas internationally, there's additional paperwork that you have to do. So for example, we had to sort out visas. As a Canadian, we didn't need a passport visa, but we did need a J1 visa. We also had to find sponsors and banking and sort out housing, so all the trappings that come along with international work. And this is also just across the border without a language barrier. So it's a very good, very eye-opening experience for all the background that has to go into it before you can actually arrive and start work. So a bit more about what I did. So the Langer Lab at the Koch Institute is a very large lab associated with MIT and has a diverse set of ongoing projects. Broadly, they work within the therapeutic delivery to the gastrointestinal tract, but there are many projects that are also outside this scope. So I worked with Dr. Jungsung Lee on a couple of projects. Two of my projects focused on developing interventions for inflammatory bowel disease using materials-based approach. And the third project was to develop a 3D printable artificial bone graft. And this project was actually brought to the lab by two orthopedic surgeons. As a laboratory assistant, my primary responsibility was to assist with reviewing literature, designing and implementing experiments, and data analysis. So in this sense, I gained exposure to a lot of techniques that are commonly used in lab. And so, for example, I was able to learn animal handling skills as well as material testing and more wet lab-based approaches like ELISA. So I found that the lab was particularly collaborative, with postdocs often officially working together on projects, but also unofficially sort of asking for expertise when needed. And the lab also hosted weekly seminars where people in the field presented, which increased exposure to current research. And both of these aspects were very beneficial as a co-op student because, again, it increased exposure to different expertise and also different research in the field. And the Langer Lab also provided opportunities for many international students. So there was also other U of T students doing their PUI co-op there, but there were also exchange students from ETH Zurich and Germany and different places in China as well. So it was very nice to get to know them, and we were able to sort of get together outside the lab and became friends with a lot of them. So it wasn't all work while we were there. And one of the benefits of doing international PUI is the places that we get to explore. So the U of T contingency at the MIT lab, as well as other sort of co-op students, went for a long weekend at a cabin in New Hampshire. So we managed to catch the first snowfall, so we didn't quite get to do the hike we wanted to do, but it was a lot of fun. And we also did sort of weekend events, like we went apple picking and went to the art gallery. So one thing to note is that when you're in a place where you don't necessarily have a car or easy access to places, you just have to be a bit more creative on how you get to different places. So for example, for apple picking, we took public transport so far and then had to walk about 45 minutes both ways carrying apples one way. So it's a bit heavy. One of the good things about the Boston area was that they had the possibility of buying a weekend train pass. So I used that quite often, and I took solo trips to Salem and Plymouth, and also just some small seaside towns to walk around. So for me, that was a really interesting aspect, getting to know the area, the place I was living. And I was also able to bring a bit of Canada to the US. So I hosted a Canadian Thanksgiving dinner. And so a lot of my friends, a couple of them from Americans from the lab, but also one of the exchange students from ETH Zurich, one of the exchange students from China. So we all sort of got together for Canadian Thanksgiving, which was very nice. And the community within the lab was also wonderful. So for example, we had a lab Christmas party with a gift exchange, and I was also able to join the Langer Lab soccer team, which played intramural sports with the MIT intramurals. So that was a lot of fun. And I was also able to join the MIT club volleyball team, which for me is something that I did in high school, but haven't been able to play as much in university. So it was really nice for me to get going on that again. And then I was in Boston when COVID hit, and it was quite intimidating and pretty scary. So I remember walking into a grocery store near my house, and it was completely cleared out. So we got a lot of support both from U of T and MIT, but the volume of emails from both schools was quite overwhelming. And so pretty much overnight, I ended up booking and driving a rental car back up to Canada. And my supervisor throughout the process was very supportive and understanding. And we were able to adapt my role as best we could as a lab job working from home. So it meant a lot more literature search and helping write up some scripts and limited data analysis because the lab access was also restricted for postdocs. So in conclusion, it was unfortunate to miss out on the community aspects in the second half of my PY because of COVID. But overall, it was an invaluable experience. The PY gave me experience in a lab and academic environment and allowed me to practice research and communication skills. In terms of the international experience, for me, it was great to expand my horizon and explore a new place. And it's also a very low-risk way to try living by myself in a new country with support and guidance of U of T and the PY office. So I want to thank you all for listening, and if you have any questions at the end, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwyneth, and thank you especially for keeping well under the 15-minute time limit. Our last speaker for today's presentation is Erin Richardson. Erin is also an engineering science student in the class of 2T1 plus PEY, and probably traveled the furthest of today's students to participate in the ESROP program. Erin conducted her ESROP research for the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, otherwise known as CSIRO, in Tasmania, Australia. Welcome, Erin, and we look forward to your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today. My name is Erin. Like Lori said, I'm an EngSci 2T1 plus PY, and I'm in the aerospace option. Like Brian, I participated in the ESROP-Global program, and I worked at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, or CSIRO. My placement was in Hobart, Tasmania, so that means I got to experience life down under for a summer, or a winter. CSIRO hosted 2 EngSci students in 2019, myself and my friend Mackenzie. Mackenzie's one of my best friends, so it was amazing to have this experience with her. We worked in CSIRO's Oceans and Atmosphere department in the Engineering and Technology program. We were supervised by Andreas and Andrew, who did an excellent job making sure our placement was seamless and enriching. Andreas is also an EngSci Aero alumni. And yes, that's the bottom in the bottom left, right on the water. I'm not sure if we should call it a workplace or a vacation place. We worked on the Mooring Physics and Engineering Sensor System, which analyzes data recorded during scientific mooring deployments. What is a mooring? Good question. Picture something like a buoy with a float on the water and a chain down to the ocean floor. A scientific moorings float contains a big battery and equipment that can relay data via satellite. Subsurface moorings also exist, which stay below the surface and are used in parts of the ocean with lots of traffic. So Mackenzie and I created software tools to analyze data collected by these mooring systems, to enable exploration of the mooring design space, and to inform the development of next-generation systems. This allows scientists to discover more about oceanographic conditions at the moorings location, to identify anomalies or any unique activity with an individual mooring, and thus inform future research. Here's what the data flow in the system looked like. So the moorings gave us binary files of data, which are represented in the top left of this flow diagram. We then wrote a Python parser to convert the binary files into netcdf files, or network common data form files of a standard format. So CDF files are being adopted as a standard way for multidimensional scientific data. They're also extensible, which means new dimensions, attributes, and variables can be added without requiring changes to the programs that read those files. Then a suite of MATLAB tools takes in those netCDF files, performs analysis, and outputs results. We actually use a GUI started by previous EngSci's summer students, and this allows the user to specify what they're interested in running and how they would like to format the results. So for example, would they like a one-page PDF of key stats, or would they like to use the GUI to look at lots of plots? And would they like to save a MATLAB file for easy future access? CSIRO was an awesome place to be both for and beyond work. On our first day, we toured the whole facility and got to see and learn about unique and exciting marine engineering projects up close. Also, I could connect what I was learning to concepts introduced in EngSci. Our second year differential equations course involved lots of MATLAB assignments that prepared me to work on the analyses in GUI at CSIRO. Our first year programming course gave me the Python skills I needed to develop the binary to netCDF parser. And believe it or not, Airflow even played a part. I decided to keep a detailed notebook, similar to the notebook we had to keep on our progress designing, fabricating, and programming a robot, and it served as an essential tool in tracking my goals, progress, and questions throughout the project. It also allowed me to more clearly communicate my thoughts with coworkers because I had a detailed record of what we had done. The culture at CSIRO was super welcoming and supportive. People were always willing to help with our project, to tell us what the best zoo to feed and visit kangaroos was, and to offer travel advice for two Canadians on the complete other side of the globe. One coworker, Mark, heard that we were interested in visiting Mount Wellington, which you can see in the bottom picture in the distance. So once he heard that we were interested in going, the next day he brought in his own maps of the trails, and he connected us with his son, Brendan, who offered to drive and hike with us at the top of the mountain. Brendan ended up bringing us on lots of different adventures, including up Mount Wellington, to a wildlife sanctuary, and to Richmond, a charming and historic town in Tassie. In the top left picture, you'll see the view we had while eating our lunch outside, and below, the beautiful sunsets over the Hobart waterfront. Yeah, I took that picture at CSIRO outside of work. I think the argument for vacation place is getting stronger. And in the top right picture, you can see Mackenzie and I on our last day of work. We gave a presentation on our project to the team and got some pretty cool CSIRO swag. Next, I wanted to share some of my favorite memories from my time in Tasmania. Pictured in the top left is the famous Tasmanian devil, or you might know him better as Taz. To its right, you'll see me with a wallaby, which is like a small kangaroo. And another special thing was that we made friends with lots of locals during our time in Hobart. On our first Saturday in Australia, we decided to check out the famous Salamanca Market, a vibrant outdoor market right downtown in Hobart. At the market, we met a family that was eager to learn more about Canada because one of their 7 kids was planning a trip to Canada in November. We ended up joining this family for Taco Thursdays several times and becoming close friends with all of them. And fun fact, all 7 of the kids are musicians. So the top right photo here was taken when we went to watch one of them, Taylor, play at a live show at a pub in town. Below, you can see Mackenzie and I at a peak of Mount Wellington outside the Museum of Old and New Art and taking in the beautiful views of Bruny Island. And in the bottom left, you can see our pamphlets, tickets, and coffee as we prepared to board the boat that would take us to that art museum because it was on an island. In the bottom middle picture, Mackenzie and I were checking out Tasmania's yearly Dark Mofo Festival, which celebrates the darkness of the southern winter solstice. This was a pretty cool thing to experience going to the southern hemisphere for the first time. In the top right, you can see the Leeuwenkamp family that I was mentioning earlier that we were so lucky to get to know over our 4 months in Tassie. They held a goodbye dinner for us on our last week, and we all played musical instruments together that night. But don't worry, we didn't go home without some more traveling first. We stopped in Sydney for 5 days and Melbourne for 1, and you can see proof of me catching waves at Manly and Bondi Beach, as well as seeing a sunrise over the Sydney Opera House. And I mean, if we were already on the other side of the world, we had to make another stop. We managed to convince our parents that Thailand was definitely on the way home and ended up backpacking through southern Thailand for 10 days before going back to third year EngSci. Here you can see me at the Grand Palace and Khao San Road in Bangkok, as well as some beautiful views at Khao Sok National Park. In the bottom middle, you'll see Mackenzie and I all ready for bed and our overnight sleeper train, bringing us from Bangkok down to the islands. And last but not least, my favorite part of the entire journey was the people I met along the way. I made friends from Australia, Mexico, Denmark, Thailand, South Africa, Ireland, Poland, the UK, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Germany, the United States, Czech Republic, Russia, and even from Canada. Yes, trekking across the city to the only bar in town that was playing the Toronto Raptors championship game at 11 a.m. meant that we crossed paths with probably the only other Canadian around, a man from Thunder Bay. This experience brought me unforgettable adventures, new friends, beautiful views, and self-growth more than I could have imagined. I picked up some of the local language. I might have said g'day by accident once or twice. I almost got used to Australians driving on the opposite side of the road. It took some time to learn that seeing a car drive by without anyone in the left seat, or worse, a dog in the left seat, was okay. We also arrived right in time for their most recent federal election, so we got to talk politics with the locals and widen our global perspective. We had the time of our lives and are so grateful to have gained such great research experience, lifelong friends, independence and confidence abroad, and incredible memories. Thank you to the Division of EngSci and to CSIRO for making this possible, and thank you to U of T's Alumni Office for organizing today's event, and thank you everyone for listening.
Well done again. We were scheduled to finish at 12:55 to start taking questions. This is a question perhaps for all three of the students. So this is from Kristen Philpott in our alumni office, who says we are joined today by several donors, volunteers, and PEI partners who make ESROPs and experiential learning possible. What would you tell these supporters is the most meaningful impact of these types of experiences for you as students, and what lessons will stay with you again as a student, as an aspiring engineer? I don't know who wants to have a go at that first. Don't be bashful.
Name them.
Since Gwyneth just spoke, I'm going to ask Brian, maybe you can answer the question from your perspective.
Sure, yeah. First of all, I guess thank you to donors and ESROP partners for making these experiences possible for us. Personally, I think what's most meaningful is kind of being able to just develop in many different aspects, as a person, as an engineer. So I was talking about this a little in my presentation. So this was one of the first more practical, technical experiences. So on that end, I was able to develop like professional skills, technical skills. But these might be things that you can get at like an internship in Canada too. So I think what was more meaningful for me is being able to work with people around the world. So in our lab, we worked with people from Hong Kong, from China. There are other research students in Hong Kong that we were able to talk to and collaborate with that are from all over the world. And I think that's what's really meaningful. It's being able to kind of build these connections with other people. And I would say overall, it's a very unforgettable experience. Yeah, I think. And yeah, so thank you for that question as well.
Aaron, did you care to add anything?
Yeah, I definitely like to echo what Brian said. I think my favorite part was getting to meet and learn from people from all over the world. In EngSci, working on projects, you're with people that have been through the same courses and had similar experiences to you recently. So it's cool to go somewhere where everyone's bringing such different perspectives and insights, and also to see similarities between things going on in Toronto versus somewhere else. So for example, when I visited Sydney, I toured a robotics lab at the University of Sydney, and I was seeing similarities in the work they had done there compared to robotics labs at UTIUS. So it was really cool to see how places so far apart were tied and like working towards common goals.
Good. We have another question here from Tom McCauley, addressed primarily to Aaron and perhaps the others. And the question is, don't these international programs also touch on pressing global issues? For instance, the data from the network of ocean buoys has pertinence for oceanic changes in heat content, acidity, etc.
Yeah, 100%. The observations you could gain can contribute to evidence-based decisions, and then developing hopefully more sustainable future. And during this summer and my time there, I was learning a lot about climate change, and this work inspired me to make changes in my own life. So I think the touching on global issues from the work was a key part of it for me.
Did anybody else care to add to that?
So I was in a very, very different field from Aaron. So I was in more the healthcare research side of things. But yeah, I think a lot of the research opportunities, or a lot of the global opportunities, do touch on various global issues. So with my research, it was more the healthcare side of things, and the research that they do impacts sort of the clinical, I guess, options that are available. So yeah, you definitely saw that, and I think that was very important.
We have another very specific question, which I think has been touched on, but the question reads, this is from Ursula Addick, and she asks, how does your research relate to coral reef degradation and climate change, which is very topical these days?
I'm not sure about the climate or the coral reef part, but I think the climate change, the collecting data over long periods of time, we can compare and see how things are changing over time, and to better understand the effects of climate change on our oceans, which will help make future decisions.
Good. Steve, I don't see any other questions, but perhaps you have not sent them or posted them. I'm trying to follow along in the chat, as are the speakers in the...
Lori, I believe all the questions have been asked right now. I think we might have one more coming in.
Jim Courtney was about to pose a question. Yes. This is to Brian. This is the travel-related question. Does the Temple Street Market still exist in Hong Kong?
Yeah, the answer to that is definitely. So I didn't touch much on this in my presentation because of the lack of photos that I took about that. But there's a lot of street markets, street food in Hong Kong that are very popular. Temple Street is one of the more popular ones. And it basically sells a lot of cheap items. And you can make it even cheaper by negotiating with people that are selling the items. So I would say just that, and the process of negotiating is a very unique experience in Hong Kong that I would definitely recommend to everyone.
Now we just got another last-minute question from Christina Hydorn, and the question is, what most surprised you about working at a different research institution? Any notable differences from how we do things here at U of T? Let's go around the table. All three of you have traveled the world, some near and far.
Well, I guess I can start. So I'll say that mine was also an academic sort of environment. So it was a university institution. So I think from what I saw, a lot of it was the same, where a lot of training before you get into labs, and a lot of the training videos have very similar content for wet labs and things like that. I can't think at the moment of any major differences in terms of how, I guess, how the institution is run from a student's perspective. We'll keep thinking.
Good. Anybody else?
So, sorry. You can go ahead.
Ladies before gentlemen, Brian.
CSIRO was a unique institution in that it's a company, but it's also a research institution. So I think that it kind of bridged a gap between my research experience after first year and my current PY. So I had worked at UTIUS after first year, which was fully research work, and now I'm at MDA, a company. So CSIRO was a really great middle ground where we were doing research, but like in a company building type of environment. One difference that sticks out in my mind, which I don't think this is Australia specific, maybe just something they had implemented, but the computers had some software that after a certain time period, it stopped you and made you stretch and take a break before continuing to bring ergonomic benefits. So it would lock you out of your system and make you take a 5-minute walk or lead you through different stretches before continuing. And Mackenzie and I both thought that was funny.
Brian?
Yeah, so for me, I think it was very interesting because the project that I was working on, we were actually working at a hospital, so not actually on the CUHE campus. So we kind of got to see how, like a hospital kind of operates, and we also got the chance to interact with some patients. And I think something that's just different in Hong Kong in general is that people there are just very fast-paced. And you see this through like their work and like just everything in life. It's like you walk slower in the street and you kind of get like glared at. So I think that was kind of interesting. But yeah.
We have one last question from Gary Vivian, who apparently is a mentor. And he asks each of you, in your various locations, did you see any evidence of work in quantum biophysics? And if so, how did it compare to your experience here at U of T? You're all engineering science students. That should be an easy one. Has the question left you speechless?
Yeah. So as I said, we had quite a few seminar talks where I was working, but most of them were within the field of sort of like therapeutics and gastrointestinal therapeutics more specifically. So I don't recall anything directly about quantum biophysics. I'm sure they have it there. I just didn't get much exposure to it while I was there.
Brian, you were working in the medical area as well. Maybe you care to comment?
Yeah, for sure. I think within like kind of our group that we were working in the department, they're very focused on kind of endoscopic technologies. I don't recall seeing like evidence personally of work in quantum biophysics, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was work in that area. But unfortunately, I can't really answer that question really well. Sorry about that.
I'm in the same boat. I don't remember anything about quantum biophysics during my summer there, but I would love to learn more.
Well, that ends the questions because we are at the appointed hour. It's great that all three of you were able to finish your presentations in less than 15 minutes because that allowed plenty of time for audience questions. This is a unique experience that we're having with Lunch and Learn. We typically meet in person at the faculty club and get to see people face to face. So thank you all for your presentations and to the audience for the questions that you posed today. Before we close, I want to mention that the ESROP and the PEY co-op programs are only made better by participation from our engineering community. Several of our alumni look to PEY to hire some of our fantastic students, many of whom leave with a job offer waiting for them after graduation. Here's hoping. Both of our ESROP students today did research supervised by previous engineering science graduates. So if you are interested in learning more about either ESROP or PEY co-op programs, please feel free to contact the alumni office. More details on how to get involved will also be shared with our monthly event survey in the days following today's event. Now, as far as the rest of the presentations are concerned, our next Lunch and Learn event is actually already posted online. That is on Wednesday, the 2nd of December. Again, it will be virtual. The speaker will be Professor Marianne Hatsopoulou, and the subject of her presentation will be the paradox of net zero, cities, transportation, and health. All of these events are made possible thanks to support that we receive from one of our U of T affinity partners, MBNA. Again, in closing, I would like to thank all of the guests for attending. Again, I would like to thank our 3 invited speakers. Every year, Lunch and Learn tries to invite a student club. In this case, it was the engineering science, not club as such, but the 3 speakers representing that particular department. Just for those of you that are new to Lunch and Learn was started by the class of 3T5 and then taken over by the class of 5T3, many of whom are still involved with the running of Lunch and Learn. My colleague Jim Courtney and I are younger members, if you will, in that we're not from the class of 5T3, so we're supporting the class of 5T3 in these events. So again, in closing, we thank you for attending today. Enjoy the rest of the day, and again, thank you to the 3 guest speakers. Thank you again.